Hello and welcome. This morning when I was watching the news, there was some discussion about the situation going on between the United States, China, and Russia, and basically talking about China's relationship with Russia. And so I watched this news brief, and needless to say, I got upset, and I feel for a good reason. And so I'm going to be giving some commentary about my feelings about the situation concerning having lived in China for 20 years, having interacted with China for over 40 years, speaking fluent Mandarin and understanding the differences between the US mindset and the Chinese mindset and how we do things and how we achieve things. And so I'm going to share some of my feelings and thoughts along with this news broadcast.
NBC News reports the US believes China may be providing non-lethal military assistance to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine. And Secretary of State Tony Blinken has said China is, quote, strongly considering providing lethal aid as well. Blinken met face-to-face with his Chinese counterpart over the weekend in Munich. The two officials spoke for just over an hour, where the State Department says Blinken warned of the, quote, implications and consequences if China does provide that support to Russia. Saturday's meeting was also the first between the two sides since the US shot down a suspected Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina earlier this month. According to the State Department, Blinken told his counterpart on Saturday that the US, quote, will not stand for any violation of our sovereignty. China, for its part, continues to deny that the balloon was sent for surveillance purposes. During Saturday's meeting, the State Department said China also made irresponsible and unfounded accusations against the United States.
So I was speaking with an acquaintance. He's a CEO who has experience interacting with and working in China. And we were talking about this surveillance balloon. And I said that I feel that it would be better if we called it a surveillance balloon rather than a spy balloon, because spy balloon is more of a diplomatic, political is a more political term, which gets people riled up. Whereas surveillance is something that can be done in business and research and things like that. And so the usage of terms that we hear around this, I think, are they're usages of terms that cause reactions versus responses. And I think that we need to be working more in the area of responsiveness rather than reactionaryism. And he said that he felt that the balloon was sent over on purpose, that they knew what they were doing, that the Chinese sent the balloon over, and that he felt that they knew that it would create some challenges and that we would cancel the meeting because he feels that they wanted the meeting to be canceled. My response to that is I don't agree, because I don't think China has anything to gain over trying to make the relations between the US and China any more challenged than they are already. However, if what he's saying is true, my response was, if that's true, then we still failed because we went along with it. We followed along with their play and their ploy, and we canceled the meeting the way that if that is what they wanted, the way that they wanted. And so by doing so, we actually walked right into their trap. My response to that is that if that is what their purpose was, that we should counteract that by saying, no, that's okay, we're still going to go ahead with the meeting, it's more important. That way we would be able to keep our foot in the door and not have closed our door to them. And if this was something that they wanted to do, which is this would be a very Chinese way of doing things, that they do something that they want us to have a certain response, and then we have that response. But I think that shows our weakness. If we're not able to understand what the Chinese are doing, then we're weak. And so if we fell into their trap, then that doesn't do us any good, and that doesn't prove that we have the capability to succeed with our interactions with China, because we just walked into their trap. So we close our door, and then the Chinese close the door, right? But had we not closed the door and we had walked through the door and said, okay, we still need to have the meeting, then that would have put the Chinese in an awkward position, because maybe if they were thinking, well, we really wanted to make this not happen, then we would have continued to make it happen, whereby we would be maintaining more of a control in working with the Chinese, maintaining a good relationship with them, which may help to nudge them further away from Russia rather than pushing them towards Russia, which is what unfortunately is happening.
Going on in the Chinese-US relationship. Joining us now from Beijing is NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freer. Janice, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Janice, look, it's clear there's been a sort of coordinated rollout of these concerns about China providing lethal weapons to Russia for the fight in Ukraine over the last few days. I heard it last week from a senior senator here in Washington, Tony Blinken, saying it over the weekend. There you've got Kamala Harris talking about it as well. What's been the reaction from Beijing to these warnings from senior U.S. officials?
Well, it's no coincidence that these warnings that come with no details on underlying intelligence that would prompt such alarm are coming to coincide with the visit of Wang Yi, who is China's top diplomat, to Moscow. He's there to lay the groundwork for a state visit for Chinese President Xi Jinping that could happen within the next month. Here, the reaction was, it was not taken well. Foreign Ministry spokesperson saying, quote, "It's the U.S. who has been continuously providing weapons to the war. The U.S. is not qualified to give orders to China." Two things have happened over the last year since the Russian invasion, since Vladimir Putin was here with that 5,000-word manifesto declaring a friendship with no limits with Xi Jinping. The two things that have happened is that the U.S.-China relationship has steadily deteriorated. There is no cooperation on anything, not even talks on climate change. There have been no phone calls. The defense officials here are not picking up the hotline from the U.S. military.
So this is a big concern. When we have completely severed the relationships and when the relationships are non-existent, then it's virtually impossible for us to have any influence in the situation. And so, in my mind and from my experience of interacting with the Chinese, I understand that when you treat a Chinese person with disrespect, or if they perceive your treatment as disrespectful, that will create challenges for the relationship. That's not to say that relationship can't be saved, but depending on how far you push that sense of disrespect or that sense of sort of like just being more superior than they are or being better than they are, that will cause the relationship to be more challenged in bringing back normalcy. And so I think that the situation that we're looking at right now is in that place, and that's a very dangerous place because essentially we have no input. China is, in many ways, in the middle between the West and the East, in the sense of the democratic West and the socialist communist East. They're sort of in the middle. They're able to sort of go in both directions. And when we don't find them acceptable to our standards, then what we're doing is we are actually creating challenges for the relationship. Rather than looking at what they can offer us, we look at the things that we don't like. And Zhou Enlai once during a meeting where he was trying to create some diplomacy amongst a lot of different countries with different cultural backgrounds, different thoughts, he said that he quoted the expression to focus on the similarities and save the differences. And this would be a great approach for us with China. If we could focus on the similarities and save the differences, then I think we could really save this relationship. And by saving this relationship, we would be able to take advantage of China's ability to interact and speak with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and have, in a way, sort of push them to help us to create some peace and some interaction, some positivity coming out of all of these things rather than so much negativity. Personally, I feel that China has the ability to put pressure on Russia, but if we don't have the relationship to get China to do that, then that's not going to happen. And essentially with our past 4 years of interactions with China, we've pushed China away because of the way that we've interacted with them, and we've spoken to them and spoken about them. And by pushing them away, we've ostracized them. And that's the reason I believe that Xi Jinping is gravitating more towards Putin, because he's getting a friendly reception from Putin. Whereas when he's interacting with the United States, it's like trying to pet a porcupine. It hurts and it's not comfortable. And anybody is going to move away from an uncomfortable situation if they have a more comfortable situation to choose from. And I think in a lot of ways that's what's happening here.
Since this balloon incident, at the same time, there has been a deepening of ties between China and Russia. There is far more trade, especially in energy. There has been Russian propaganda and misinformation that's been allowed to flourish here in China's information space about China's role in the Ukraine war. And China seems to be getting on with diplomatic business with other people. Last week, having a state visit with Iran's president. So there is the sense that China is looking to build its ties elsewhere. And right now, a relationship between the U.S. and China that was once described as fraught now simply doesn't seem to exist. There's a greater gap in understanding. There is greater mistrust on both sides. And there doesn't appear to be any conciliation on either side to resume talks toward perhaps rescheduling Secretary Blinken's visit. The Secretary himself confirmed after that meeting with Wang Yi yesterday that China has made no apology for what has happened with this balloon incident.
Richard, has the Chinese would...
I'd like to bring up a little cultural tidbit around Chinese culture. Apologies in China is something that causes people to lose face. And amongst people who have good relations, who are friends and have good friendships and strong relations, apologies aren't necessary because it's not seen as something strong in China as a sort of a strength, whereas it's seen as when I apologize, I'm losing face in front of you. At the same time, I think that if we want China to apologize to us, that we should maybe find a reason to apologize to China, maybe for our banter or the way that we use words, our lack of diplomacy in our choice of words, and how the media is making China look bad, and things like this, and all of the negativity that's coming out of the United States around China. As a person who understands the Chinese culture, I can understand the Western American perspective, which is very narrow. I mean, there's the expression in Chinese, "Jingdi zhuwa," it's the frog at the bottom of the well. You're at the bottom of the well, you're within your own cultural environment, and you're feeling very comfortable here. And you're seeing the sky above you, and you think that that's everything. And you don't see, what don't you see? You don't see the world outside you, and you don't understand the different cultures, the different mindsets, the different ways of viewing the world and interacting with life. And so I think when we narrow ourselves down to a one-way fits all, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have in interacting with other cultures, and I think that we have had over the years. But at the same time, I think that this is something that's important for us to recognize. We do not understand the Chinese, and yet we're very quick to judge them. We don't know the best practices with the Chinese. All we know is our practices, and when we continue to apply our own practices with a sense that our practices and our ways are right, then I think that a culture like the Chinese culture, who's been around for 5,000 years, existed probably for more, that we sort of come off as being a little bit immature and childish. And so I think that if we can take a few deep breaths and sort of figure out a way that we can change our approach to China, and if it can be a friendlier approach, because friendship is very important within the Chinese culture, that's the way to get things back on track, is friendly interactions, not interactions of threats and interactions of finding fault and pointing fingers, rather finding the good things, focusing on the similarities, and putting the differences to the side for a while so that we can normalize the relationships. Once the relationships are normalized, then we can start finding ways to have China support us in the things that we need to get done in these other countries that China has good relationships with and is able to interact with. So China is, in a sense, very much in a space where we could really take advantage of China's position in parts of the world where we have challenges. And so by being able to find that middle road with China, we actually have a lot to gain. And China has nothing to lose.
I'm just kind of thinking of the repercussions potentially to the Chinese if they were to go ahead and defy the US on this and start providing weapons to the Russians. I mean, as Janice points out, there haven't been very many communications on the diplomatic front over the last year, and I know that's alarming. But there's still a heck of a lot of trade goes on between China and the United States. America imports something like $500 billion worth of goods from China every year. So there could be economic repercussions if China was to go ahead and provide these weapons. Why would the Chinese do this at this point?
I'm sitting here listening to Janice, thinking about exactly that, Kathy. I think on one hand, strategically, at the risk of being, shall we say, cynical, the Chinese might see some advantages in a long war in Europe.
You'll notice when Mr. Haas is explaining his feelings, it's all a supposition. He's coming from his tone of voice and the words that he's using. It's very obvious that he really doesn't know. He's just sort of pulling things out of the air. This is what my Western mindset tells me. This is what my American culture tells me. And so when we're unable to put ourselves into the cultural mindset of the people that we're interacting with, we will never be able to understand why they're doing what they're doing. Because the only thing we have to view it from is within our own worldview. There again, going back to the concept of the frog at the bottom of the well, looking up at the sky and thinking they understand everything. We don't. There's so much out there. We don't have the language of the Chinese in our heads, but there are some of us who do. And those of us who do look at this situation from a very different perspective because we have the Chinese information. No, I'm not brainwashed. I didn't spend 20 years living in China learning the language and learning how to interact with the people to be called brainwashed. But yes, I have been called brainwashed before, which is ridiculous because that's so absurd when a person is actively learning a culture and a language and is able to understand that culture through that language and know how that culture interacts and reacts and responds in situations. And that's the thing we're lacking. We don't have those people in our government. We don't have people like me who speak the language fluently, who are able to see from one situation how the Chinese would respond and how we could respond in order to be able to have the proper response to maintain a positive relationship versus how the Chinese respond and how we respond in a way that it's a reactionary sort of pick at or pointing at or poking the Chinese to create negative outcomes such as moving towards Russia and Putin. We are in control of this situation as long as we have a relationship with China and we can be respectable and diplomatic and know how to take advantage of the opportunity and how to take advantage of the Chinese culture to be able to get the Chinese to do what we want them to do. It's a very subtle move difference, but the way we're doing things is very it's like a bull in a china store, basically. So listen to what Mr. Haas is saying. He's supposing. He's using words like I think, maybe, perhaps, to explain because he doesn't know, and he's just grabbing things that he can from within his own cultural mindset.
It keeps the West and the United States tied down. It reduces our military readiness for other parts of the world. They certainly don't want Russia to lose. So I think that's partially it. Second of all, my guess is they see no possible upside in U.S. relations right now. So they don't see any reason from their point of view to exercise constraint. They may also, and this gets really interesting because it gets exactly your question, they may not see much downside. They may actually say, well, what is the United States, what do they have left to do to us? They've already cut off a lot of strategic trade. They've kept the tariffs. The United States is moving ever closer to Taiwan. So I think from the Chinese point of view, they probably don't see a lot of reason to hold off helping Russia. Also, Xi Jinping really cast his lot with Vladimir Putin. When he signed this no limits friendship agreement, he now put his own credibility on the line.
So one thing about Taiwan, the U.S. relations with Taiwan have always been there. They were there before the relations with China. It's just that because China, after the 1970s, became viewed as the country where we're having diplomatic relations, where we have those relations with. And Taiwan became a country that we did no longer have diplomatic relations with. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a relationship with Taiwan. We do. And obviously that's something that we see as very important. But at the same time, we need to understand that Taiwan and China also have a relationship, and they have a cultural, historical relationship, which binds them together in ways that we don't understand. Because we don't understand the Chinese culture, just like Hong Kong, Taiwan, China. They're all the same culture. They're all the same history. They're the same language. And they all understand each other from perspectives that we have absolutely no comprehension of. Historical perspectives, cultural perspectives, and they know how to communicate between those perspectives. They don't necessarily communicate from a political perspective because they can also support their relationship through a historical and a cultural perspective. So that helps to lessen that political piece. And so the Taiwanese are actually hoping to have better relations with China, but with the U.S. coming in and creating challenges, that's not helping Taiwan. As far as the Xi Jinping's reputation, that being put under pressure for what he signed, the agreement that he signed with Russia, with Putin, that's also something that came after we pushed Xi Jinping more towards, and China more towards Russia and Putin. And I did an earlier video about that, explaining that it's actually the United States who is creating this and causing this movement and this migration of China and the Chinese government more towards the Russian government. This is something that we need to stop and recognize, that we are instigating and creating these, maybe not on purpose, but our actions are causing these things to happen. We could change that if we had different ways of acting towards China. Sometimes it might be like a scientist doing an experiment. Maybe we should try some different approaches to see what happens. We might be surprised.
So I don't think he can afford to see Putin do poorly. A question for Janice about Tony Blinken. Whether she has any sense from the Chinese point of view, whether they're even interested now in hosting a visit, or whether they think that ship has sailed for the time being, and they're just essentially prepared to live for an open-ended amount of time without...
So China living for an open amount of time, I find this as being a very ignorant and funny way to say it. China has been living for 5,000 years and longer. I mean, their culture can go back to 7,000 years ago. 5,000 years, 3,500 years of written history, and they've always been China. They're still the same country, even though they were ruled by different minorities or different ethnic groups. They've always been China. The culture the Chinese culture and language have maintained for that period of time. So if we're talking about who has the most time, it's not the United States. We've been around for 250 years, and will we be around in another 1,000 years? That is a real hard question. Will we be around in another 50 years is a good question. But will China be around in another 1,000 years? I think if they've made it 5, they can make it 1 more. So I think for them, that's a drop in the bucket. So as far as time is concerned, they've got a lot more time than we do. And I think that if we're not careful and if we don't choose our words and our actions correctly, we will just lose that time even that much faster. So yes, China will still be around. They have plenty of time, and they're not in a hurry. There's a Chinese expression, or there's a Chinese mindset, that if I can't get revenge in my lifetime, I'll just have my grandkids do it for me. Whereas for us, the concept is I need to do it and I need to get it done now, right? So we don't have that time mindset. We don't think about, oh, we've got time to do this. It doesn't matter. If it doesn't happen today, it'll happen tomorrow. But the Chinese think like that. They're not worried. They've got a lot to depend on. They survived all sorts of famine. They've survived all sorts of wars, and they're still here.
any high-level diplomacy with the United States.
Them out of there. As if there was not enough to worry about, we spent, the last hour and a half covering President Biden's surprise visit to Ukraine over the other side of the world from North Korea. Is this just a periodic?
So the broadcast that I was using cut out a piece, a very important piece of, from my perspective, of that reporting of what Janice in Beijing was talking about, where she actually is expressing very roundabout some of the concerns on the differences, sort of coming out and saying the U.S. has not done really well in this situation. So I'm going to, on a different recording that I did, where there is no picture from the news broadcast, but you can hear it. So I am going to record that in the background so that you can hear that, which I think is very important to help us better understand that maybe even people who are living in China and doing the reporting from China have enough understanding to recognize that we're not doing all that great in our relations with China, and we can do a better job.
Accustomed to not having to embrace relations with the U.S., certainly with the way things have been nosediving over the past year. There was a high level of embarrassment that Secretary Blinken canceled or postponed the visit. There have been no signs that there's been any discussion on either side to try to get the visit rescheduled. It was an embarrassment to the leadership in Xi Jinping because he had been seen as being more conciliatory in his diplomacy. And there really is the sense that they are getting on with business with others. With this state visit to Moscow expected next month, with the trade deepening with Russia, with the support deepening for Russia, and also with the visit of the Iranian president last week. China was being cautious in the deals that it's been doing. They are very aware of the U.S. sanctions on Iran, but there really is the sense that they are trying to fortify ties with countries that are going to be more friendly than the United States has appeared to be over the past several months, and certainly in the past several weeks with the balloon incident.
Okay, NBC's Janice Mackey-Freya in Beijing for us. Janice, thank you very much. All eyes on China and what they're going to do next.
So I think that what we're looking at here is the idea of friendly, and she brought that up, and she did mention just the usage of that word. I think is very important for us to understand that in Chinese relations and Chinese relationships, friendly and friendship is a very important word. It's a very important way to act, and it's something that for the Chinese culture, it's probably one of the most important skill sets to be able to have a successful business endeavor, and also political or diplomatic endeavor with China, is the word friendly. And this is something that I think that we as a culture don't really think about. We don't consider that to be a cultural practice. We see that as being something maybe a little bit more casual or something. And in ways, yes, that's true. There is sort of a casual aspect to that friendliness. But what it does is it helps to bond people. And when you're interacting with the Chinese, when you can be friendly, the Chinese will befriend you, and they will also, as those friendly relationships grows, that will bind the relationship to where friends do things for friends in Chinese culture. And that to us may sound like, oh yeah, friends rub other friends, pat other friends' backs or whatever. But that's not sort of the concept of a tit for a tat, whereas it's, I'll be honest, my best friends that I've ever had in my life are Chinese, because they have always been there for me. They're there for me when I needed something. Even when I'm back in the United States, if I'm expressing challenges or frustrations or difficulties, my Chinese friends are always willing to help in ways that my American friends have never done. And so friendship in China is a very important aspect of success in China. If you're able to be friends with the Chinese people, you'll be very successful in the Chinese culture. And that goes for anything from business to friendships to relationships to politics and to diplomacy. It all fits in because within their cultural worldview, that is the important aspect of the way to success. And with that having been said, I'll also add that the opposite also happens, and I've experienced that with Chinese friends. When I've said something without really stopping and thinking about the possible ramifications of my words, then I also have lost some really good friends and also some good opportunities. We have the expression, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You could probably consider the exact opposite in Chinese culture. Our words are really important. What we say, how we say it, implications, what are we trying to say? The Chinese are very savvy when it comes to words and meaning, and they're able to hear deeper meanings and deeper insinuations in words. And we're very casual with our words. And so if we're able to tighten that up a little bit and take into consideration the ramifications of using the wrong words, I think we could look back at the past few years of relations with China and recognize that maybe we could have chosen our words a little bit better, because choosing the right words is really what it's all about in having a successful relationship. So I really hope that we can consider Zhou Enlai's words from 1955 in helping to support diplomacy and focus on the similarities and save the differences.